right. Good afternoon. I'm going to pull Facebook up here so that I can chat with you guys. All right, it's going to take just a second and it'll come up. There we go. All right, good afternoon. My name is Teddy. I'm from, whoopsie. There we go. Sorry about that. Good afternoon. I'm Teddy from Timber and Twine at Small Acre Farm, and we're going to talk about dye gardens today. Hi, Q. Hi, Erica. It's freezing here too. It was 1 below when I fed this morning. I think it's like 5 out there or something like that. But what a perfect day to talk about dye gardens. The seed catalogs have started to arrive at my house, and I am ready for spring. We haven't had much of a winter really yet. I mean, we had a blizzard the last few days, and got probably maybe another 8 inches of snow last night. So, we're getting winter now, but there hasn't been much up until now. We usually get our first snow for Halloween. So, we need the moisture. We really do, because we count on that snow runoff for our water. Okay, so Erica asks a good question. What catalogs do you recommend? I haven't found a good, true catalog that has a lot of dye things. I will do a resource, I'll do a resource sheet, and I will put resources in there for dye seeds. There are a variety of places that I get dye seeds, and there are, I know of at least one, besides myself, I know of at least another WAFA vendor who has seeds. So I'll put that resource together and get it up. What's today? Thursday. I'll get it up either today or tomorrow so that you have resources. And we're doing this way far ahead of time so that you should have plenty of time to order seeds. Some seed companies are out at this point, or they haven't, put their new stock up. Indigo seeds, the viability of those seeds is timely, so you really want to plant those in that next year. So they're not seeds that necessarily have a lot of germination as you carry them over, but we'll talk about that as we go through. So if you're interested in seeds, you can send me a PM and I'll let you know what I've got. So the word, I know people are right now, everybody's talking about their word for the year and all that, but a word that's coming up for me this year is focus. And I keep trying to push it aside and look for other words, but it just keeps popping up. So in light of that, what I wanted to do today, last year I did this talk probably later in the spring, and I tried to cover everything. I think I went on and on for an hour and a half. It was crazy. So this year what I'm going to do, hi Catherine, is focus on a few plants that I have grown successfully, and I will talk to you about those. I think they are good plants over a variety of zones. I'm in zone 5, so we have winter and it gets cold here. And so some things that would be, perennial or biennial are definitely annual here. But I'm going to talk about a few things, and then I'll kind of run through some plants that I think are dye plants, or that I know that are dye plants, as ideas. And I'm going to grow some new things this year as well. And we'll just experiment together. And so the 4 things that I'm going to talk about, maybe 5, well, 4 for sure, I have dyed with before in different ways, and I'll talk about that. But I'll do some dyeing with them this summer, and I'll do demos. So we can do those things together. So the first plant that I want to talk about, hi Krista. I am looking forward to spring gardens as well. So the first one that I want to talk about is marigold, and marigolds are pretty easy. I sow directly after the first frost. They're great companion plants with lots of other garden plants. They are kind of they're kind of pest control. And so they're a great way, to have color, to have that pest control, and then have a dye plant to go along with it. They're pretty hardy. There are lots of varieties, and I haven't met a marigold that doesn't give pretty good color. I had a weird one this last summer. They were huge blooms, and the dye color in the pot was red, which is usually it's gold or yellow. So that was weird. But it still dyed a yellow. Not a lovely yellow, but it definitely gave color. And I think it's important to note that a lot of plants will give you color in the dye pot, and they may color fiber or fabric, but they're not necessarily, they could be fugitives. So the test for dye color, there's color fast, light fast, wash fast. So a light fast test would be that you might have a little test skein of yarn. You put it in your window, you put a piece of cardboard over half of that skein, and you leave that skein for a month. And then you pick up your cardboard and you see what you have. So lots of them are, give you that great color to start out with. I think of avocado as an example of this. Some people have good luck with avocado, but it does fade over time to gray. I do mordant for marigolds. I mordant for everything except for indigo with alum. And there are other mordants, but that one is a pretty general one. And in the big scheme of mordants, it's a pretty safe one. So marigolds are easy. They are prolific. They grow well. They're pretty in the garden, and quite honestly, they're everywhere. So I have wonderful friends, both here in Colorado and all over the place, that send me their marigolds. So I've been sent boxes of marigolds, and I love that. I plant lots of marigolds all over the farm. Often I'm, scattering seeds and covering it with a little dirt in places that aren't pretty, and just hoping that they will grow. I dye with dried, I dye with frozen, and I dye with fresh. So in the summer, hang on a second, I want to make sure that I can see your comments here. In the summer, when the marigolds are blooming, I pinch off the blooms, and I just, I pull my shirt out, and I just, I make a pile of them, and I go through and I pick probably maybe half to 3/4 of the blooms that are out there every morning. I like to leave some for the bees and the butterflies. But I pick every day. And I just, I keep a Ziploc bag. I have freezers out in the barn because I store lots of milk cubes for different things. So I have 2 big freezers. And so I put my little pile in there and I freeze them until I'm ready for them. Unless I'm, ready for a dye pot that day, and then I will definitely dye with fresh. And I just stick them in the pot. The whole thing, once they're dried, you can certainly pull the petals and the seeds off. But if I'm dyeing with fresh, I just put the whole bloom in the pot. What else about marigolds? I don't know. I think they smell good, and so I think it's a nice dye pot that smells good. So marigolds are easy. They're a great one to start with. There are lots of things that you can. I mean, most dye plants dye yellow, so there are lots of things. You get creative with yellow when you're doing botanical dyeing, but they're pretty easy. The next one that I want to talk about is madder. And madder is a long game. So you plant madder, and then you can harvest. It's the roots that you're looking for with madder, and you can harvest that in 3 years. So this coming spring will be my first harvest of my madder garden. I'm just really excited. I don't expect the roots to be huge, but my beds are probably, I don't know, maybe 5 by 5. And I planted kind of a section of them, and then the next year I planted another section, and the third year I planted another section. So I will harvest some of that first section, probably the first, when it is consistently, pretty warm outside. I did read an article recently about somebody who dyed with the leaves and the stems. I had not heard about that before. I brought an example today. I've got a bunch of stuff here. So madder is an interesting plant. So this is a stalk of madder. It's not necessarily what you're looking for. And it's pokey, kind of like, it's a little like Velcro. It sticks to, if I go out there and stick my sleeve with something like this, and it will hang on to my sleeve. So it's an interesting plant. And then the seeds, are here, those little black seeds. Madder, I start inside. My indigo and my madder, I start inside in those little peat disc pots. Don't eat the cat scratcher. Dogs. I plant them probably 4 to 6 weeks before our frost date, which is usually around May 15th. And I plant them in the little pots, and then I, once they, get a couple of inches or so, then I transfer them to a bigger pot, and I, kind of bury their necks a little bit. I don't want them to get too gangly. And then I plant them, and then I planted them outside in my bed. And then they're vining, and they spread everywhere. So you have to be a little bit careful. I'm guessing I'm going to have madder coming up all over in my garden this year, because I had lots of it go to seed this year. So that first year, then you clip it down. I covered mine with, I keep old fleece that aren't any good, or I don't know. So every year I cover it with a fleece, and then it snows, and that's insulating for the roots. And then I very carefully peel it back in the spring, and little shoots are coming up. But it took over that bed and a chunk of the walkway there next to it. So that's madder. So it's a long game. You have to kind of, what do they say? The best time to plant a tree was years ago, and the next best time to plant a tree is now. Madder's kind of the same way. Just, get started. And in the meantime, there's lots of places to pick up madder dye stuffs as well. And there are several different kinds of madder. The two most well known, I've got to read this, are Rubia tinctorum, which is the kind of madder that you will probably get seeds for and grow. It is heat sensitive, so you want to be careful when you dye with it, that you don't get it too hot. And madder is kind of a complex dye stuff, so the first heating of it will bring up certain colors and you can pour it off, and then the next heating will bring up other colors and you can pour that off and get different colors as you work through kind of the levels of the dye. So it's complex and kind of fun to work with. Yeah, too hot for madder is about 150. Yep, good point. Thank you, Lori. Okay, let's see. I should jump back here and see if there are other comments that I need to. I can, if you want to plant, if you're interested in dye stuffs, you can message me and I can give you information about that too. Yep, indigo. Mary, I'm gonna talk about indigo next. I love growing indigo in my garden. It was kind of this mysterious plant for me. I was concerned that it was going to be kind of persnickety, and it was great. So indigo, I also I don't have indigo plant. Well, I have leaves, but indigo I plant inside in the spring 4 to 6 weeks ahead of time. I do the same thing as the madder. I let it grow to a couple of inches, and then I put it in a larger pot and bury it. I have some photos here. Let's see. So this is indigo. These are seedlings. I had a catastrophe last year. I had all of my indigo and madder in a big plastic container, my seedlings, and I left them on the kitchen table. I went downstairs for an hour and I came back and the cats had dumped everything upside down. So I had, and then they ate most of the madder plants. Apparently the indigo wasn't tasty, but the madder was yum. So I didn't have a lot of madder to plant last year. But these are the seedlings. Yeah, Japanese indigo. Sorry, I should have been specific about that. Japanese indigo is what I start inside. And then I was trying to think. So this is the plant in the garden. And you can just start to see here that little blue tinge. That was indigo from the year before last, and some fibers that I dyed with it. The fabric that I dyed with the fresh indigo was definitely green. That yarn is mohair silk, maybe merino, and it was a gorgeous aqua blue. And there are lots of different ways to dye with indigo. Vats are probably the most well-known, and they are a little more complicated than other dye stuffs. But fresh indigo is really fun. I have a whole series of videos that I did of a fresh indigo dye experiment this last summer. And I think I have, so here, let's see. So here are some blues and some greens that I got. I think some of these were underdyed with marigold. So lots of ways to dye with indigo. So then I transplant those out after the frost date. And often when I plant the indigo outside, they're a little bit leggy, and they lay down on the ground, and they look like they are not going to make it. And I just water them, and I wait. And I water them away. And a couple, 2 or 3 days later, then they just start to, perk up and look better. And like marigold, indigo will give through the summer. So you can go out and trim some leaves and do a little experiment and come back, and it will have sprouted right up again. I did 3 harvests and probably could have done another one, but I got concerned about frost. And I leveled, I cut all the stalks down. I spent hours and hours stripping the leaves off. I stuck the stalks in a bucket of water, and they were stripped bare. And about, 2 weeks later, that bucket of stalks that was stripped bare looked like this. And so the indigo gave and gave and gave this summer, and it was wonderful. And I had hoped to plant these, but I don't remember what happened. Actually, I think I set them outside, and somebody was going to take them, and they didn't. They didn't come and get them, and they didn't make it. But I also dug some up and brought them inside, and they lasted for a while, but they weren't really all that happy. I think they would have been happier if they had not been in dirt once I brought them inside. Okay, so that's indigo. And like I said, there are some fun ways to dye with indigo that don't involve putting a vat together. And like Tina said, there are some pretty easy vats to do. So I shouldn't say that it's all that complicated. It's, again, there's kind of this mystique around indigo. But it is a fun plant. And you can, there's an easy way to do it by blending it up in the blender with some ice. Or you can do the salt rub method. So there are 2 methods, and I'll do some experiments with that this summer as well. Okay, somebody asked... Yeah, thank goodness our cats are cute, right? We have 2 pairs of cats, and some of them are cute and some of them are frustrating. Does it require full sun? It does. It really wants to be in the sun. But I also water it. I mean, we're in the desert here, but I water it pretty well every day. I give it a really good soak. And I had it in it was 3/4 of a bed because I lost some of my starts to the cats. I had a little spot left over, and I planted marigold to the side, but the indigo grew up and really shaded the marigold, and that marigold plant didn't produce as much. So, marigolds want sun too. Okay, Lori says indigo also likes rich soil and plenty of water. Yep, plenty of water. And good. We have animals, and so we amend our beds with, sheep and llama, aged sheep and llama manure and those kinds of things. All right, so let's see. We've done marigold, we've done madder, we've done indigo. And so the last one that I want to talk about that I've had some experience with is Hopi dye amaranth. And here is the plant. It is, my experience is that it's a pretty easy plant to grow. And then it will seed all over the place. I have it growing in pastures that are a ways away from my garden. It's a beautiful plant with beautiful red. So here's a picture of the leaves. And then it creates that stalk. Let's see if I have another one. So then it creates that stalk, and the seeds are, it can be used for a variety of things. They're a little like quinoa, so you can cook them, and use them kind of like quinoa or rice. They can be toasted, and then the plant can also be used for dyeing, but there are specific ways to do that. So the first year that I grew it, I was so excited, and I dyed Erie silk cocoons, and I mortated my cocoons with alum. I was going to do a solar dye, and so I put them in the jar. Well, actually, I think I put the leaves in the jar first, and I let it sit for a while, and it made this beautiful, bright fuchsia. I am not a pink gal, but it was brilliant and gorgeous. And then I put the silk in there, and let it sit, I don't know, for a couple of days. And it got pretty hot. And I pulled it out, and then I went to rinse it, and all of the color rinsed away. And so I was kind of discouraged about that, and did some more research and found that it's used to make a traditional bread called, I think it's pica bread. That's kind of a pink bread, but wasn't necessarily a fiber or fabric dye. But then Anne, which I think is odd, because lots of dye seed companies sell Hopi dye amaranth. But then I saw that Ann Salmons did some beautiful dyeing with it. I think Catherine has some fiber. Maybe she'll post a photo. So there is a way to dye with it. I think it involves vinegar. But we can share that information if you decide that you want to grow Hopi dye amaranth. We can share that information with you. Trish, I don't know what beautyberry is. I am not familiar with that. Oh, Mary Jo, you make a good point. I think I guess I should say that about, lots of dye plants. Some dye plants are really invasive, and you can't woad. I can't buy woad from another state and have it sent to Colorado because it's so invasive. And I know that there are places that you can't grow cotton and things like that. So it's important to know, what you can and can't grow. And then, so let's see, was I done with the amaranth? I think, I know. I was going to show you. So that first year that I dyed with the amaranth, and it was, the experiment wasn't very successful. I had left the plants in the garden, and I went out after the first snow, and saw these little specks of pink on the ground. So it made it made beautiful colors in my garden, even though it didn't dye the silk. So that was kind of fun. But I am going to grow it again. I mean, it's going to grow itself again this year, and I'm going to try again with that recipe. It gets pretty big, probably 3 to 4 feet tall. The stalks do, and the stalks are huge. I had to dig them this year. I couldn't cut them off. But it's a fun plant to grow, and pretty easy and beautiful. And the little tender leaves are great in salads and things like that. So it's definitely a multi-use plant. Okay, let's see. Um, that's okay, Trish. I'm going to look it up anyway. I am always interested in new plants. I think botanical dyeing is fascinating, and I say that about plants that are fugitive. But I also, if you've hung around me long enough, you'll know that one thing I say that my dye mentor said to me, I used to always be texting her and saying, I found this in my garden, or this is growing in the road, or and I, will it make dye? And she would say, just throw it in the pot, just throw it in the pot and bring it up to temp and throw, I've got lots of fibers. So, throw a little fiber in the pot and see what happens. And then test it. Test it in the windowsill. Wash it like you would, if you were going to, gently wash something that was made with full wool and kind of do some of those experiments and see. We have rabbit brush here on our property and growing along the side of the road and all over the place. And I have a friend whose parents have almost a field of it. And so we went and cut swaths of it one year, and I dye with that. It makes this beautiful kind of delicate buttery yellow, and the fragrance is just lovely. So I love to dye with rabbit brush. It's really fun, and it's a big plant. It gives lots of dye. So then the last one that I want to talk about is Hopi Black Sunflower. Black is kind of an elusive color when it comes to botanical dyeing. Often it is a combination of a color and a very tiny bit of iron sulfate, and you have to be very careful with iron sulfate because it will contaminate everything that you're dyeing. And so I have one pot. I do it very carefully. But Hopi Black Sunflower will give some kind of a dark purple, pretty dark purple kind of, and sometimes maroons. It's a beautiful plant. It's a sunflower. I love sunflowers. I think that they're happy plants. This is the one that I was successful in growing 2 years ago. Last year I planted sunflowers around my food garden, and our soil is clay, and I hadn't amended that outer portion, and none of them came. So I'm going to be more intentional about how I plant my Hopi sunflowers this year. So it's the sunflower seeds that make the dye. So that is another one that is a good possibility. And somewhere I have a little bag of seeds from that year. I was so careful with it, and when we got we were going to get a surprise frost, I went and I bagged the blossom. I just really took very good care of that one little the one plant that came that year. So I'm hoping to get lots. The heads get pretty big and they give lots of seeds. So, a few of them would give you plenty of seeds to do some seed saving and plant the next year and also do dyeing with. It's the shell part of the seed that makes the dye. All right, let's see if there are other questions. Yeah, Kathy, right. The birds do plant the sunflower seeds. And I have others that come up. I have some kind of weedy, leggy ones, and the flowers aren't very big. They're great for, backgrounds and photos and things like that, but they don't give much of a seed. And they're all over the place. The birds have spread those. So you never know what birds are going to plant. Yeah, I think that's true. Things that come up, those are the things that survive. The Hopi amaranth that I have growing now in the cracks in my sidewalk and in my goat pasture this way instead of my garden this way. It's a tough plant, and I found that I wanted to, if I didn't want it someplace, I wanted to pick it pretty early because it became a pretty big, tough stalk pretty quickly. Okay, so let's talk about other things that are dye plants. Goldenrod is a good dye plant. It gives a yellow, and I know it is pervasive in lots of places. I just ordered some black, I may pronounce this wrong, scabiosa pincushion flower, and that's supposed to give some pretty dark colors. I'm trying to think about what I've got in my dye cabinet. A lot of the things that I have are barks, and they're not, let's see, but I did have, hang on a second. Oh, Dyer's Coreopsis is kind of a, I'm not sure it's the marigold family, but it looks a little like a marigold, or a little like Rudbeckia maybe. Black Knight Scabiosa is the name of the, and then there's a hollyhock, a double black hollyhock. Cosmos give some color, and what was I thinking of? There's something else I was thinking of. Well, weld, if you can grow it where, or woad, if you can grow it where you are. Woad is kind of a, it's a blue, and you dye with it like you dye with indigo. So let's see, get Coreopsis. That's good to know that it's not color fast. Let's see, Black-Eyed Susans do give color. I've grown them. I didn't get enough to dye with. I have a few out there in my freezer. Oh, Mary, that's interesting about the Hopi dye sunflower. Burning some kind of wood and using the ashes. Ooh, I find that very interesting. Lots of good, I love the history of dyeing. I don't, I love to read about the history of dyeing. I think it's really fascinating. What other plants, you guys? Dandelions. I know I am the weirdo that's out there excited about the dandelions coming up in the spring and picking them. My neighbors think I'm crazy. Oh, black walnut. Yeah, black walnut is a wonderful dye, and it's kind of a it's a self-tanniner for sure. Tannins are when you dye plant fibers, you have to mordant and then tannin, and walnut, lots of nuts have different kinds of tannins. But it makes a beautiful kind of, it can make a beautiful kind of chocolate brown. And walnuts are kind of, you can throw walnuts in a bucket, put some water on it, stick them outside, and let them heat and cool over a winter or a summer. And it breaks that pod down. and releases that dye naturally. You can also boil them up, but that's one way that you can do it. Okay, let's see. Okay. So it sounds like Coreopsis is not light fast, but if it was protected from the sun. I don't know about black iris, but I'm going to come back through the comments and pull some things out here and do some research. I have not dyed with dahlia. Let's see, yellow with orange. Oh, interesting. Terry, tell me about, do you know about like color fast and light fastness on that? I mean, wash fastness? I have not dyed with lichens and mushrooms. I have some lichen here that was gifted to me, and I would love to try it. I think that it has to be treated with soaked in alcohol maybe first. I think the kind I have gives purple. I had forgotten about that. And I need to get that out and dye with that this year. And I did dye. I have a couple of friends of mine are mushroom gatherers. I know there's a different name for that. But when they found out that I was a dyer, they went looking, and so I dyed with hawkswing and something else. And it wasn't very, the colors were not very dynamic. It was, I don't know, kind of a dirty brownish gray and not very dark. But I have really just started, I'm very interested in it. I have really just started to kind of tap into that information, and it's dry here. So we don't have, you really have to go looking for the mushrooms here because it's not a great, it's not great mushroom hunting around here. Partridge pea pods. I don't know about that one. Butternut. Oh, sumac. I love dyeing with sumac. I buy my sumac, but I think it's just I'm really in love with sumac, and it's a tannin. And so when I first dyed with it as that, second mordanting part for some cotton yarn I was dyeing, I didn't even want to do the second part of the dyeing because I thought that sumac was so beautiful, but it also underlays some gorgeous colors for over dyeing. You get those beautiful jewel tones. Okay, well, Kathy, then let's talk about that because I'm really very interested in lichen and mushroom dyeing. I want to know about that, and I would love it if you would share that information. Walnut leaves. Yep, pokeberry. I have dyed with pokeberry. It was marginally successful, and I heard that it was more of a stain than a dye, and I don't know that for sure. That's just, it's something that another dyer told me. So I don't know that for sure. But I have also seen that lots of people dye with pokeberry, and I think it's a berry red, pink. Donna, can you tell us, have you dyed with it? What else? I'm trying to look around the room and see what I've got that's dyed here. I think, I am not, yellow is not my favorite color. And so I hadn't done lots of experimenting with yellow. This summer I did lots of experimenting with yellow, and then I made an indigo vat and I overdyed a bunch of stuff. Uh-oh. Ellen says the messages got shut off in my live. Oh, not Ellen, Lori. Wonder what that's about. Let's see. Oh, maybe because there are 100 comments. It looks like... Oh, I'm sorry about that. Commenting has been turned off for this post. Well, you guys, I don't know what that's about. But I will put together a resource list of places that you can source seeds. And I will also put together a list of other plants, some that we talked about here in the comments, and some that I know of or have done some research on. So you will have a variety of things. And then I would just do a little due diligence of what will grow in your area. And if you, some of you had asked about dye stuffs, and you can DM me if you want about that. So thank you guys for coming along. That was a fun chat. I'm so excited to hear about everybody's dye gardens. I hope that you will plant and post all along the process. And then when we get into having plants this summer, let's do some dyeing and compare notes. I would love that. So thanks for coming along this afternoon. I hope you have a great afternoon. You guys take care.